We are now through 4 days of the transfer portal window, and Notre Dame has 0 commitments, multiple top targets off the board, and more questions than answers. And with all the pressure on this team heading into 2026, this slow start feels impossible to ignore. We'll try to make sense of it all on today's Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome in to Locked On Irish, your daily home for Notre Dame football. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which is now the #1 sports podcast network, all thanks to your support. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I graduated from Notre Dame. Now I'm a producer at Fox Sports, and I've been covering the Irish since 2020. Thank you for joining me here on Tuesday, January 6th, and for making Locked On Irish your first watch or listen of the day. If you have not already, make sure that you are subscribed to the YouTube channel or following along on your favorite podcast platform. And do not forget to drop your questions in for this week's Friday mailbag in the YouTube comments or over on social media. You can find us on X at Locked On Irish and on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. All right, today we are diving into Notre Dame's slow and frustrating start to the transfer portal and why the lack of clarity is becoming just as concerning as the misses themselves. Then we're going to shift gears and talk about the players who actually made their way to campus, including a potential impact defender and a much-needed quarterback safety net. Then we're going to wrap things up with my thoughts on Micah Shrewsberry's post-game outburst against Cal and why that moment might actually tell us more than you would think. But we begin today's show with a question a lot of you have been asking. What is Notre Dame's plan in the transfer portal? Because we are through 4 days of this 2-week window, and the honest answer right now is, I don't know. And I'm not sure the people inside the Goog have a great answer right now. Because through 4 days, Notre Dame has yet to land a single commitment. Not one, and that on its own isn't necessarily a death sentence. There are other teams out there who have yet to land a commitment in the transfer portal. But when you start to factor in how this is all unfolded, that's when it becomes concerning. Let's start at wide receiver. Notre Dame's top wide receiver target, and arguably their top target in the entire transfer portal, was Nick Marsh from Michigan State. And before Marsh even made the trip north on 31, he committed to Indiana. Notre Dame never got their top target in the portal on campus. Okay. That happens. Sometimes you finish second, and Indiana's rolling right now. They look like they could win the national championship. But then the backup plan at boundary receiver, Ian Strong from Rutgers, committed to Cal late on Monday night, again before Notre Dame was ever able to get him on campus. The Irish are hoping to host him later in the week, but that visit never happened. So now fans start asking, okay, what about Mylan Graham from Ohio State? He's young, he's inexperienced, but he's extremely talented, and he's an Indiana kid. But at this point, I don't think Notre Dame is even on his radar. Well, what about Reed Harris from Boston College? That's another name that we have discussed on this show. As of right now, no visit is scheduled for Reed Harris at Notre Dame. And then, just to make things a little worse, KK Smith officially put his name in the transfer portal on Monday. So I'll ask the question plainly. What is the plan at wide receiver? Because right now, it remains completely unclear. But wide receiver was not even Notre Dame's biggest need this cycle. That distinction belongs to defensive tackle, and there is not really a close second for as important as landing a big-time wide receiver may be. Notre Dame needs at least 2 defensive tackles from the transfer portal, maybe even 3, because you are trying to replace Gabriel Rubio, Jared Dawson, Donovan Heinisch, and potentially Jason Onye. That's your top 4 defensive tackles from last year walking out the door, and it's not like they've recruited extremely well at that position either. The #1 defensive tackle in the entire transfer portal is Mateen Ibirogba from Wake Forest, and he felt like the perfect fit for Notre Dame. He plays a position of need, and he previously played in the ACC for Wake Forest. That is the exact type of transfer profile Notre Dame has landed many times in the past. I think there is some dispute about whether Ibirogba has his degree or whether or not he has more academic credits to complete, but either way, that's still sort of the perfect profile for Notre Dame when they're looking at transfers. After some conflicting reports about whether or not Ibirogba would visit South Bend, multiple sources reported Monday morning that he was, in fact, going to make the trip at some point this week, maybe even Monday, and that alone felt like a huge win for the Irish. But then late on Monday night, something changed, And that visit is no longer going to happen. And at this point, all signs point to Ibarugba ending up in Lubbock for Texas Tech. Another defensive tackle Notre Dame scheduled to visit this week was Horace Lockett from UCF. On Monday, he announced that he's removing his name from the transfer portal entirely, and he is staying at UCF. And then there's Armel Mukam, a player who hasn't done much through his first 3 years at Notre Dame, but he's at least another able-bodied option that you could use in the rotation next year. But he entered the portal over the weekend. So I'll ask it again. What is the plan at defensive tackle? Because that is a non-negotiable, and Notre Dame has zero momentum at that position right now. And then we get to kicker, another one of Notre Dame's biggest needs. And anyone who watched the Irish attempt a field goal last year understands exactly why that is. Watching Notre Dame kick field goals last season was like watching me step onto the tee box. You shield your eyes, you hope for the best, and more often than not, it doesn't work out. But Notre Dame had a top target at kicker. He had a strong year at an ACC school, and going into the portal window, Notre Dame felt really good about where they stood with this player. Well, that player never even entered the transfer portal. Okay, fine. That happens sometimes, so you pivot. Well, that pivot just committed to Texas A&M. Another miss at another critical position. So what's the plan at kicker? At nickel, Notre Dame has the luxury of being very specific about who they want because of the talent in that defensive backfield, but the player that they wanted the most at the position in this cycle was Jontez Williams from Iowa State. Williams could play outside corner, maybe even compete with Christian Gray. He could play nickel, and On3 has him as the highest-rated cornerback in the transfer portal. He was supposed to head to South Bend the day after his visit to USC, but he never even got on the plane. Williams announced his commitment to the Trojans on Sunday before that visit ever took place. So what's the plan at nickel? Then there's defensive end. Josh Burnham is a player Notre Dame would have loved to bring back, either as a starter or at least someone who would rotate heavily with Bryce Young at strong side end next year. Instead, he entered the portal and signed with Indiana in a matter of days. And congrats to Josh Burnham, because I'm sure that's going to work out great for him, as it has for pretty much every other transfer to Indiana. But for Notre Dame, they couldn't find a way to keep a guy who will likely be a meaningful contributor for a national championship contender again next season. You also have Chaz Coleman, an edge rusher from Penn State, who is a player Notre Dame was in on early, but they quickly fell behind, and I don't even think they're going to get a visit from him at this point. So what's the plan at defensive end? When you take a step back and you look at all of this collectively, it's obviously concerning, because the common thread here is that so many of Notre Dame's top targets made their decisions before the Irish could even get them on campus. To me, that shows a lack of urgency and a lack of preparation, which leads me to the Brody Foley situation. And to me, this is the most alarming situation out of all these, even the Nick Marsh situation where he ended up committing to Indiana. Brody Foley is a tight end from Tulsa. We've talked about him on the show. He's the third highest ranked tight end in the portal according to the On3 rankings. Foley was supposed to arrive in South Bend on Monday for a 3-day visit. And when I woke up on Monday morning, I was damn near certain we would hear about a commitment from Foley by the end of the day, because this had felt locked up for weeks. I first heard about Notre Dame's interest in Foley before Christmas, and he made a ton of sense. He's a veteran player. He was very productive last season for Tulsa. He's a clean fit for what Notre Dame needs at tight end. He could have pushed Cooper Flanagan for the tight end 1 job once he's healthy, or at worst, he would have been a very reliable number 2 tight end. Then, literally, on the day he was supposed to visit, Monday afternoon, Notre Dame called and canceled the visit, according to John Bryce from Football Scoop and Matt Freeman from Irish Sports Daily. Now, Notre Dame is not expected to take a tight end at all in this cycle. And let's be clear, I'm not saying Brody Foley is the next Tyler Eifert or he's the next Kyle Rudolph, because he's not. And yes, there are some people who would argue that Notre Dame doesn't even need a tight end in the portal this cycle, but I would strongly disagree with that point, given the inexperience and the injury history in that room. But that's not even the point. The point is this: 4 days into the transfer portal, on the day your top target at a position was supposed to arrive, the coaching staff wasn't even sure they wanted to take a player at that position anymore, so they passed on him this late in the game. That doesn't make any sense to me. And to me, that is more egregious than any individual miss so far, especially when you consider that Notre Dame had more time than any other Power 4 school to prepare for the transfer portal. They missed the playoff. They opted out of a bowl game. They had 4 full weeks to prepare for this. So you cannot convince me that you scout a player like Foley, stay in contact with him for weeks, establish yourself as his clear number one option, schedule a 3-day visit, and then on the morning of that visit decide, actually, never mind, we're out. It's not like they've been overwhelmed with commitments they suddenly have to budget for. So again, what is the plan? Not just for one position, but for the entire portal cycle. A lot of fans are asking that question. This is Mike Martin's first real experience running a transfer portal window as a general manager in college. And so far, I'm not sure he has an answer. Technically, yes, he did hold the GM role during the spring window of 2025, but Notre Dame did not make any real moves then. Their work was already done during the winter window when Chad Bowden was still in charge at Notre Dame. And Martin and his staff deserve a ton of credit for what they did on the recruiting trail this past cycle. They signed Notre Dame's best high school recruiting class since 1990 in the class of 2026, and that is a huge accomplishment. But in modern college football, winning in the transfer portal matters just as much as winning in high school recruiting. Look at the 4 teams left in the college football playoff. 4 transfer quarterbacks, rosters largely built and elevated through the transfer portal. Notre Dame obviously has a different philosophy, and it's one that I actually prefer. Build the foundation through high school recruiting, and then use the portal to fill gaps and raise the ceiling. That is exactly what they did in 2024, and that is what led them to an appearance in the national championship game. They had 8 portal additions. That's it, but every single one mattered. Riley Leonard at quarterback, Bo Collins, Chris Mitchell, and Jaden Harrison at wide receiver, Jordan Clark and Rod Hurd in the secondary, R.J. Oben off the edge, Mitch Jeter, who sent Notre Dame to the national championship on a game-winning field goal. They didn't need a ton of guys. They needed the right guys. And at this point, I think it's fair to ask whether Notre Dame could even get close to landing 8 portal players this cycle. So yeah, I think it's totally fair to be concerned right now if you're a Notre Dame fan. But I also understand that things can change quickly in the transfer portal. A couple days from now, I could come on here and be singing a very different tune. I hope that's the case. And I also want to be fair about something because context matters here. Notre Dame is never going to be a school that takes 20 or 30 players in the transfer portal every single cycle. That's just not who they are. And honestly, I don't want them to be that, but that's not what I'm asking for here. A lot of Notre Dame's wins this offseason are internal. It's retaining players, it's development, it's continuity, it's keeping your core intact while other programs are constantly patchworking rosters together. That matters, and it counts for Notre Dame. But, and this is the key part, that can't be the entire plan because even with strong retention, Notre Dame still has very clear holes on this roster that we've talked about at length. Defensive tackle, wide receiver, kicker, edge depth. These aren't luxury additions. These are positions that directly affect whether you're good or whether you're elite. And right now, Notre Dame has targets they want to land, and they're just not getting them. So that is what makes this concerning, especially when you zoom out and you think about the bigger picture, because there is an enormous amount of pressure on this program heading into 2026. Not just to win, but to win at the highest level, to contend, to capitalize on a window that people inside and outside the program have been talking about for years. This is not a rebuild year. This is supposed to be a make or break year, which is why the margin for error in this portal window is extremely small. I don't pretend to know everything that's going on behind the scenes. Maybe Mike Martin, Marcus Freeman, and the staff have a clear plan that just hasn't materialized yet, and maybe the patience pays off. I hope that's the case. I really, really do. I would love to come back on here later in the week or next week and say I was wrong, that the Irish closed strong, they filled their biggest needs, and reminded everyone why they have earned the benefit of the doubt. But at this moment, through 4 days in the transfer portal with 0 commitments and multiple top targets already off the board, it is fair to ask questions. It's fair to be uneasy with the understanding that the sky isn't falling yet, but things need to turn around quickly. And it's fair to say this, Notre Dame doesn't need to win the portal, but they do need to execute it cleanly because the expectations for 2026 aren't getting any lower and the opposition isn't waiting around either. So that's why the start to this portal window feels so unsettling, but the story is not over yet. Let's talk about the players who actually did make it to South Bend and why a strong close could still change the outlook in a hurry. That's coming up next on Locked On Irish. Thank you for making Locked On Irish your first watch or listen of the day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you have not already, make sure you check out our brand new Everydayer Club. You'll get access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Irish. Same show, same schedule, just no ads, and it works on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever podcast app you use. If you listen every day, it's a really easy upgrade. Go to lockedonirish.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. Today's episode is brought to you by Rocket Money. Let's be real, managing your finances can feel overwhelming. Between subscriptions you forgot about, bills that keep going up, and trying to figure out where all your money actually goes each month, it's easy to feel like you're losing control. And who has time to track every transaction or hunt down hidden fees? That's where Rocket Money comes in, the personal finance app that helps you take control. It finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. I was shocked when Rocket Money showed me I was paying for streaming subscriptions that I completely forgot about. It's already saved me money. I love how it tracks all my subscriptions and lets me cancel them right in the app with just a few taps. No more hunting down customer service numbers. Plus, the automatic transaction categorization is a game changer. I can finally see exactly where my money is going each month. You can set budgets and goals, get personalized insights, and receive real-time alerts for large transactions, upcoming bills, and low balances. It even consolidates your checking, savings, loans, and investments into a single dashboard so you get a clear view of your entire financial picture. Let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/lockedon. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Welcome back to Locked On Irish, and would you believe it, two players did make their way to South Bend on Monday. Brayden Atkinson, the quarterback from Mercer, and John Henry Daly, the defensive end from Utah. The bulk of their visits will take place today on Tuesday, but simply getting those guys on campus feels like a huge win for Notre Dame. That's where we're at right now in the transfer portal. Most people assumed, myself included, that John Henry Daly would end up at Michigan once he entered the portal last week following his former coach Kyle Whittingham, but instead Notre Dame was able to get him on campus, and this has the potential to be a big win. John Henry Daly is the number 7 player overall and the number 2 edge in the On3 transfer portal rankings. This is because Daly put up massive numbers for Utah last season and actually was named a first-team All-American by Walter Camp. He recorded 47 quarterback pressures, 27 quarterback hurries, 48 tackles, 17.5 tackles for loss, and 11.5 sacks last season in 11 games for the Utes. PFF grades are not everything. I understand that they are, a little bit of a controversial topic in the football media analyst space, but John Henry Daly graded higher than Leonard Moore did last season, and that is saying something. He is a really, really impressive player. But here's the issue, and it's a big one. Daly suffered a serious injury on November 22nd this past season against Kansas State. He was dominating that game too. He had 2 sacks and 3.5 tackles for loss in the first quarter, but then he went down on a non-contact play, and then he had to be helped off the field, and he didn't even return to the sideline in that game. That injury ended his season. Not surprisingly, it happened so late in the year, and there have been reports that he suffered a ruptured Achilles tendon. If that is accurate, if he actually did rupture his Achilles, you can't reasonably expect much from him in 2026 because Achilles injuries often take at least 12 months to recover from. However, John Henry Daly himself pushed back on those reports. He replied to, ironically, a Michigan fan account on X saying, quote, "I've been seeing this everywhere. I will not be out for next season. I'll be back in 6 months," end quote. So he posted that on December 28th. So if you take him at his word, that would put him back in time for fall camp if he were to commit to Notre Dame. So at this point, I genuinely don't know what to make of the situation, because if Notre Dame lands him and he really is back in 6 months, that's an absolutely massive win. But I'm skeptical on 2 fronts. One, that he ends up anywhere other than Michigan and playing for anyone other than his former coach and Kyle Whittingham. And 2, that the injury timeline is truly that optimistic, because Achilles injuries are no joke, man. Just ask Aaron Rodgers how that speedy, miraculous recovery worked out for him. Now, as for Brayden Atkinson, we've talked extensively on this podcast about how Notre Dame needs an experienced backup quarterback behind CJ Carr, and I think Atkinson fits that mold. He threw for 3,611 passing yards on 8.9 yards per attempt with 34 touchdowns and 11 interceptions as a true freshman for the Mercer Bears. He won the Jerry Rice Award given to the most outstanding freshman in the FCS, and he has 3 years of eligibility remaining, but I think Notre Dame is primarily focused on what he could provide in 2026, which is experience and depth behind CJ Carr. At this point, I do not expect Blake Hebert to be in the mix for the backup role for Notre Dame next year. And outside of him, your only options are true freshmen Noah Grubbs and Teddy Gerard. That is not a comfortable place to be for a team with national championship aspirations. Would you like Atkinson to be a little bit bigger? Sure. He's only listed at 6'1", 250 pounds. And are there concerns about his arm talent? Yes. Would you prefer more experience than one season at the FCS level? Probably. But the odds of finding a perfect candidate, one who is experienced, talented, and willing to be a backup, are extremely slim, to say the least. So Atkinson would make a lot of sense for what Notre Dame needs next season, even with some flaws in his game. Syracuse, Baylor, Boston College, and Cal are all involved with Atkinson, so this is not going to be easy. But I think if Notre Dame was willing to pay up, I actually think they can get this done and provide CJ Carr with a legitimate quality backup for next season. Notre Dame is also expected to host 2 more defensive linemen this week. Defensive tackle Xavier Gilliam from Penn State and defensive end Jalen Thompson from Michigan State. Gilliam already visited Indiana and Tennessee, so the fact he hasn't committed yet is a big positive, considering how things have gone with Notre Dame getting the later end of the visits, but Notre Dame is expected to be Gilliam's final visit, so that could end up proving to be very valuable for the Irish. Thompson, meanwhile, visited Texas A&M over the weekend, and he's going to be on campus at Notre Dame on Tuesday. But given how things have gone at defensive tackle so far, Xavier Gilliam from Penn State has to be one of, if not the top priorities left on the board. He redshirted his freshman year at Penn State, but then played 400 snaps last season. He is listed at 6'2" and has added roughly 40 pounds since high school. Now he's checking in at 300 flat. Gilliam has 3 years of eligibility remaining, and even though he hasn't produced a ton on the field yet, there are plenty of reasons to like the upside here. He carries the added weight well, gets off the ball quickly. According to Pro Football Focus, he registered 15 quarterback pressures and 11 stops last season for the Nittany Lions. The production hasn't fully caught up to the traits, but with the buzz around Notre Dame's new defensive line coach, Charlie Partridge, it's easy to see how a player like Gilliam could take a big step forward if he were to decide to end up with the Irish. I'd expect news on him in the next day or so, so we're going to continue to monitor that situation. I'm curious whether the staff would be willing to take Jalen Thompson, the defensive end for Michigan State, and John Henry Daly if that scenario presented itself, but let's not get greedy here. Let's try to get one commitment before we're talking about 2 at the same position. But Jalen Thompson is a good player in his own right. Notre Dame would absolutely love to have him. He's listed at 6'3", 260 pounds. I feel he's like a like-for-like replacement for Josh Burnham. He started 26 games at Michigan State, so he's experienced. And even though the Spartans struggled throughout his career, Thompson was arguably their best defensive player. He led the team with 6.5 tackles for loss and was tied for the team lead in quarterback pressures. I don't think he would start for Notre Dame, but they need experienced rotational depth, and he could absolutely provide that. So if Thompson were to commit, it would be a win for Notre Dame. Then there's Xavier Townsend, the wide receiver from Iowa State. He arrived in South Bend on Monday night, expected to have the bulk of his visit on Tuesday as well. Townsend also has visits scheduled to Purdue and Missouri later this week, and I'm just going to be honest. I'm not sure why this would be a take for Notre Dame. I just don't really see the value. He's listed at 5'11", 195 pounds, but has just not shown much at the college level. He spent 3 seasons at UCF, where his best year came in 2023 with 325 receiving yards and 163 rushing yards. That's like pretty good. And in his lone season at Iowa State, he recorded 243 receiving yards and did not score a touchdown. I've seen some people label him as an explosive return guy, but the numbers don't back that up either. He didn't return punts or kicks regularly at Iowa State. He did return for UCF, but he never brought one punt or kick back for a score. So I'd have to imagine Notre Dame already has more dynamic options on the roster. It's not like they're bringing in Jaden Harrison from Marshall, who already returned 2 kicks to the house the season prior to that and was an All-American kick returner. That is not the case with Xavier Townsend. My guess is they're simply looking to add a veteran presence to a young room behind Jordan Faison and Jane Greathouse. But as I said in the open, despite the slow and frustrating start for Notre Dame in the transfer portal, they can still right the ship if they land some of these guys. If they add John Henry Daly and he's healthy, plus Gilliam and Jalen Thompson, that's 3 legitimate defensive line additions. They would still need at least one more defensive tackle, in my opinion, but that would be a strong foundation. Then if they land Braden Atkinson as the safety net at quarterback, that checks off one of the toughest needs in this cycle. Those moves alone wouldn't solve everything, but with more than a week left in the portal, it would represent a significant step in the right direction. All right, before we get out of here, we need to talk about one of the wildest endings you're going to see all season and the moment that sent Notre Dame's men's basketball coach completely over the edge. That's next on Locked On Irish. Okay, to wrap up today's show, I want to talk about Micah Shrewsberry and his outburst following the end of the Notre Dame-Cal basketball game on Friday night. I know we're a few days removed from it now, but this one is absolutely still worth discussing. If you did not stay up very late on Friday night to watch the end of that game, first of all, I respect your sleep schedule, but second, you missed absolute chaos. Notre Dame was on the verge of starting 2-0 in ACC play. They were up 3 against Cal with just under 10 seconds left. Then Logan Imes literally tapped Cal guard Day-Day Ames as he was pulling up for the game-tying 3 with about 5.5 seconds left. Ames makes the shot, and the officials call a foul on Imes. Brutal. But that's not the end of it. Then the refs got together, and they reversed the call, and you're thinking, great, Notre Dame is going to be all right. The game is tied. They're getting the ball back, and you're thinking, disaster avoided. And then, unbelievably, the refs reversed it again back to the original call. I honestly don't know if I've ever seen that before. Then Ames goes to the line, he hits the free throw, and Braden Shrewsberry misses the game winner at the buzzer. That is just a crushing way to lose a game, especially on the road when you're about to go up 2-0 in ACC play. But the second that Braden Shrewsberry's shot hit the floor, Micah Shrewsberry charged toward the official on the baseline in a way that was completely over the top. He had to be restrained by multiple people on the Notre Dame bench, and it is fair to ask, what would have happened if no one stepped in? Would Micah Shrewsberry have actually fought the ref? I'm not saying yes. I'm also not saying no either. And obviously, you cannot have that happen. From my angle, though, it looked like something else might have happened too, because it appeared that the official may have said something to Cole Serta because Serta and the ref were exchanging words before Shrewsberry got there. So maybe on top of the frustration from the call and the way that they reversed it and then reversed it back, Shrewsberry may have thought an official was chirping one of his players, and that's what really sent him over the edge. But ultimately, though, none of that really matters because of how it looked. And look, the video does not look great, man, especially the cell phone video from the sideline. And I get it. Optics matter, especially when you're the head coach at a place like Notre Dame. Shrewsberry, to his credit, has been very apologetic since the incident, and the ACC decided not to suspend him. And to me, that is the right call. Because as bad as the outburst was, and it was bad, it did not turn physical, and I think the ACC is also acknowledging the elephant in the room. That was a horrific call that very likely changed the outcome of the game. Yes, I understand that college basketball now is the continuation rule after fouls, similar to the NBA, but in no world was that a foul. Like I said, Logan Imes literally tapped his side, and it happened right in front of the official. I do not understand how he called that. It was actually funny in the aftermath seeing the video of the play go viral. There's a lot of Louisville basketball fans on my timeline because I'm from Louisville. A lot of my fans root for them, so I kind of follow the program even though I'm not a fan. And I saw a ton of Louisville fans complaining about that specific ref who made that call for making bad calls in a Louisville game earlier on in the season. So clearly the ref has a reputation, and he completely missed that call in the moment. And then the back and forth reversal afterward just made the whole situation even worse. They lost control of the situation, and I think that's what led to Shrewsberry completely blowing a gasket. So while I'm not going to sit here and say that was the right way for the head coach of Notre Dame basketball to react, I also can't pretend I don't understand how that moment pushed him over the edge. You're staring at a 2-0 start in conference play after a brutal, long West Coast trip, and it gets taken away in the most bizarre way imaginable. That is just a nightmare scenario for any coach. And look, I've not been the biggest defender of what the men's basketball program has become under Micah Shrewsberry, even though I was on this show getting really excited when Notre Dame hired him away from Penn State. But in this specific instance, I am absolutely willing to give him some grace. The Irish have had a few days off after that road swing, and even though I'm sure the last few days haven't exactly been pleasant for Micah Shrewsberry, I actually liked what I saw from the team on the court in that West Coast trip. If nothing else, maybe this moment serves as like a weird rallying point, a little us against the world energy, because I'm not saying they're about to go on some magical run, but if there's one silver lining in all of this, it's that this team actually showed some fight, almost too much fight, but maybe that's something they can build on in ACC play. All right, that is a wrap for this episode. Thank you again for making Locked On Irish your first watch or listen of the day. Before you head out, please subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please give the video a like if you're watching along on YouTube, or rate the podcast 5 stars and leave a review. And by the way, if you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Get Locked On Irish ad-free, plus members-only Discord access and more. Head to lockedonirish.supercast.com to join the club. And I'm going to be right back here tomorrow morning with more updates and reactions as the transfer portal continues to unfold. Until then, enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you tomorrow.